to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, April 28th, 2022. This meeting is being held electronically due to the pandemic provisions of the open meeting law and my determination that it is not prudent for us to meet in our usual place of business. All votes will be taken by roll call in accordance with the statute. So first of all, taking attendance, Manager Loftus. Manager Maxwell.
Aye.
Manager Hijmati.
Aye.
Manager Miller.
Here.
Manager Olson.
Here.
Manager Sando. Manager Sando. Manager Loftus.
I think Manager Loftus is muted.
Here.
Thank you.
Manager Sando. And Manager White is here. We have a quorum. Is there any member of the public here other than Mr. Whisker that I know Mr. Herring, for example, and Brenda Davitt are here for the audit?
President White, it does not look like it. We have, as you just mentioned, representatives from our accountant and auditor and staff, but no members of the public.
Thank you very much. On the consent agenda, we have approval of the April 14th board minutes and approval of the check registers for the general checking account, the surety checking account, and the wire transfers. And we have 4 resolutions. 2224 is approval to purchase replacement laptops. 2225 is approval to amend the construction budget for the 6 Mile Marsh Prairie Trail construction project. 2226 is authorization to submit Hennepin County Environmental Response Fund spring grant application. And 2232 is authorize a second phase contract with Smith Partners to complete the strategic historic review. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll approve the agenda first.
Oh, darn, I skipped.
Point of order.
We have a motion to approve the agenda. Is there a second?
Maxwell second.
Thank you, Manager Maxwell. Thank you very much for calling that to my attention, Manager Miller. Voting on approving the agenda, Manager Sando. Manager Olson.
Aye.
Manager Miller.
Aye.
Manager Maxwell.
Aye.
Manager Loftus.
Aye.
Manager Hijmati.
Aye.
And Manager White votes aye. The agenda is approved. Now to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Approval.
I take the motion from Manager Hijmati and a second from Manager Miller. Voting then on the consent agenda. Manager Hijmati.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Miller.
Aye.
Maxwell.
Aye.
Loftus.
Aye.
Sando.
Aye.
And White. Thank you. And White votes aye. The consent agenda is approved. My update first, we have Mr. Whisker, Mr. Carlson, and I attended a meeting with Representative Greenman from South Minneapolis, and it's completed the round of meetings we were having in advance of the Nokomis White Paper Town Hall. So that was a nice thing to get taken care of. The executive committee met this morning. We heard a presentation from Mr. Herring regarding the audit. We were able to answer our question, ask our questions and get them answered, and voted to recommend that the board approve the audit. And there was a meeting in the office where the investment team from Bremer came in to present on the investment possibilities. Manager Loftus and I were there, as well as Mr. Whisker and Ms. Johnson. Just take a look. Policy and Planning Committee report, Manager Miller.
We had the initial meeting on the budget, and it was very well received by the committee in terms of its clarity and comprehensiveness, and we really appreciate the work the staff has done on it. And it's one of 5 or 6 meetings we will have on the budget through the year until it's up for final approval in November.
Thank you very much. The MOD quarterly meeting report, Manager Sando.
Yes, it was a very, very productive meeting. Couple highlights. Minnesota Pollution Control Agency gave a report, an updated. That's about what I have right now. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. The upcoming meeting and event schedule.
President
is-
White, Manager Olson raised his hand, maybe wanting to weigh in on MOD.
Thank you. I didn't see that. Go ahead, Manager Olson.
Yeah, and to add a little bit to what Steve mentioned, the Met Council did a presentation talking about their priorities water list. And what they're going to do is, what they've done is they've judged the lakes in our watershed as well as adjacent watersheds based on recreation and tourism, health habitat, drinking water protection, tranquil connection, equity, industry, utility, and science and education. And if the lakes that we are working on qualify for their priority list, then they are there to help us as a new partner for those projects that are on the affiliated lakes. So I just wanted to throw that in there as one of the things that they did a great presentation on. Thank you.
You. I did just a tiny bit of sampling on that list, and of course, we do have some bodies that are on it. It was good to see. No surprise. The minutes, the meetings of committee and board in May are printed in the agenda, and Manager Miller will be attending the CAC meeting on May 18th. Moving now to item 11.1, the financial audit and funds transfers. That is resolution 22-027. Mr. Herring is here.
There's the mute button. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Share my screen here as I've got a brief PowerPoint to run through that'll just kind of summarize what I'm presenting here tonight. So again, my name's Andy Herring from Redpath & Company, the CPA firm that you've chosen to audit your financial records for 2021. We've completed the financial audit. Our reports are dated April 22nd, so last Friday. And we met to discuss those reports with Mr. Whisker, and then we met with the executive committee this morning. I'm here to recap the results of the audit this evening. So first, we issue 4 reports as part of the audit. Our independent auditor's report, which gives an opinion on the financial statements, a report on internal controls related to the financial policies and procedures of the watershed district, a report on compliance with various state statutes, and then a communication with those charged with governance letter to the Board of Managers. So the results of each of those reports, the first report, which is located near the front of the financial statements, is our independent auditor's report. And that's based on the, that's the main point of the audit. That's based on our testing of the amounts and disclosures in the financial statements, making sure that the assets, the liabilities, the revenues and expenses that are listed in the financial statements are correct and correctly presented, and also that nothing additional is missing from the financial statements that should be reported. So we perform a variety of tests using different methods, sampling, look at things analytically, we tie back to board minutes. And the results of our audit was a clean audit opinion, or an unmodified audit opinion would be the technical term. And that's the highest form of opinion the board can receive. And that's consistent with last year's opinion as well. So a pass rating and unmodified opinion for your auditor's report. The next report is report on internal control. Well, that's really gets into the policies and procedures of the organization. We don't necessarily audit all of those policies and procedures, but we do look at them when we design our procedures throughout the audit. For example, is there a proper approval when it comes to approving receipts and disbursements, and are the bank reconciliations approved? And when that approval is happening, we're looking to make sure the person initiating that transaction is not the same person as the person approving the transaction. You don't want somebody approving their own work. So we're looking for a proper segregation of duties and things like that. The results, we did not note any internal control deficiencies. The third report, a report on internal control, or I mean, a report on legal compliance. The state auditor's office issues a guide that we complete as part of our audit. A guide of various statutes that the Minnehaha Creek has to follow. So we test for compliance with those statutes during the audit. Statutes relating to bidding and debt and disbursements and your cash and deposits, just a variety of compliance items relating to finances. And again, no news is good news here. We did not note any findings or any compliance issues. The last report, more of a letter. It's a letter of required communications that the auditor is required to make to the governing body. Some of the standard communications in there are whether any new accounting policies were adopted during the year, which there were not. There's a section we need to disclose whether or not there were any difficulties encountered or any disagreements encountered during the audit. I'm pleased to report that there were not. Everything was well prepared and on time for us to present or begin the audit when it was scheduled to start. So great to be able to report that. And then there's also a section on other matters, which we've discussed in prior years for those who may recall. There's an old payable on the books that we continue to note due to the city of Minneapolis. And then there's also older surety deposits that are held. 10 years is no magic right or wrong threshold, but that's just a number that we've keyed in on and noted at the end of 2021, there were $119,000 of outstanding deposits held greater than 10 years, but that is an improvement from the previous year. As you can see there, 23 deposits totaling 79,000 that were previously held for more than 10 years were released during the year. And that was done through a process of attempting to reach out to the deposit holders, writing letters. Sometimes the district was successful, sometimes they weren't. But I know staff continues to work on that. And then there's also a handful, $98,000 worth of deposits on hand for which the permittee is not identified on this listing that we have. And that's decreased by about $8,900 during the year, but still a recommendation to continue to try to identify the holder of those deposits and return it if warranted. And then the last slide here, just a slide of financial highlights for 2021. Revenue exceeded budget by about $118,000. expenditures were 6.4 million less than budget for 2021, a fairly significant variance there. Although, as you know, projects don't always start on time, or often projects will be budgeted, but then the project may last 2 or 3 years. So if it was budgeted to begin in 21, it may last and wrap up in 22 or 23 here. Fund balance increased $2.3 million during the year to a balance of 20.1 million. And that's 241% of 2021 expenses. And then finally, the principal payments on debt. The debt of the district was paid down $2.3 million during the year, leaving an outstanding balance of about 15.5 million. So all positive highlights there. The district's definitely in a strong financial position moving forward. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Andy. I'm going to jump in here because I was
Wanted
waiting for President
to-
White.
Mr.
See if he's
Herring,
having some
may I-
bandwidth issues.
We have a little bit of unreliability. Do managers have questions for Mr. Herring? If you could not share your screen anymore, that'd be great too.
Sure.
Manager Maxwell, did you have a question?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Do you want a motion to accept the audit?
A resolution 2227.
I can't hear.
President White, we're having some chop with your internet signal as well as some audio issues. I don't know if you've got something covering the mic or papers, but we didn't catch the last thing that you said. And while I'm on deck, Manager Loftus has her hand raised.
Thank you, Manager Loftus. Let's hold it for one moment since we're dealing with a motion here. Manager Miller, you move to adopt resolution 2227.
I withdraw that because I think it's appropriate the treasurer makes the motion. So, excuse me.
Okay, Manager Loftus.
Thank you, Sherry. I'm happy to make the motion. My comment, would you want it after I make that motion? Or should I make a comment now?
Go right ahead. Go right ahead now.
Thank you, Mr. Herring, for your audit. Appreciate your work and effort. And staff has definitely worked and noted on your communications regarding escrows and returning those. Is there anything that as a board of managers we should focus on in the next year, or any recommendations beyond those written communications you think we should be aware of, or are we in a good position, as you stated before?
From my standpoint, you appear to be in a good position. You know, I'm always looking back. You know, I just finished auditing 2021, so we're 4 months into 22. So I'm not really sure how things are going so far in 22, but I did mention this morning, you know, when we were speaking about the internal controls, that, you know, assuming the structure or the organization or really how you do things doesn't change from a financial standpoint, you should be okay. But it's, if you were to add new activities or start purchasing in a new way, or I don't know, but when you change things up or start doing things differently, that's when you really have got to reevaluate your procedures and how you're doing things. So that's, I guess that'd be the one thing to look out for if you start doing something differently.
Okay,
I don't know if that answers your question, but for right now, I don't see any other issues that should be addressed or that the board needs to be concerned about from a financial standpoint.
okay. And then one of your highlights caught my attention. And I'm curious if you're seeing it with other clients, kind of just the delay of work and capital projects due to the pandemic and, having such a big amount of our expenditures being deferred. I think there's a decent explanation for that in the narrative, but curious what you're seeing with other clients.
Yeah, I have seen some delays. Some have been able to move forward as expected, but it really depends on the project and whether that project was, how far along in the design it was, say, before the pandemic hit, or if all of the resources were available, or sometimes there could be personnel shortages within the project. So I'm seeing delays, but it's sporadic, but definitely seeing delays.
Great, thank you. And President White, I'm happy to make the motion to accept the 2021 audit. Thank you.
Accept your motion. Thank you. Is there a second to the motion?
Manager Sando seconds.
Thank you, Manager Sando. Manager Olson, you have your hand up.
Yes, just as a point of interest to the rest of the Board of Managers, the Executive Committee this morning, after review and holding the meeting regarding the audit, did make a unanimous recommendation to approve the audit as is, as a recommendation to the rest of the board.
Any other questions for Mr. Herring? Then voting on adopting the resolution, Manager Miller,
Aye.
Manager Olson. Manager Olson. Manager Sando. Manager Loftus.
Aye.
Manager Hejmati.
Aye.
Manager Maxwell.
Aye.
And Manager White votes aye. The resolution is adopted. And thank you very much, Mr. Herring.
You're welcome. Have a nice evening.
Thanks.
Our next
Bye-bye.
item, 11.2, is Resolution 2229.
President White,
Yes,
before we move on, there's an accompanying resolution to accepting the annual financial audit. And that's simply a series of sub-fund transfers that's part of closing the audit out, labeled separately Resolution 22028.
thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 22?
Move approval.
Manager Olson has moved. Is there a second?
Maxwell second.
Thank you, Manager Maxwell, for seconding. Are there questions concerning the fund transfers? Seeing no hands, voting then on adopting Resolution 28. Manager Maxwell,
Aye.
Manager Hejmati,
Aye.
Manager Loftus,
Aye.
Manager Sando. Manager Sando,
Aye.
Manager Olson,
Aye.
Manager Miller,
Aye.
Manager White votes aye. Thank you for bringing that to my attention, Mr. Whisker. Item 11.2, Resolution 2229, Ms. Christer and Ms. Moran presenting.
Good evening, Manager or President White, managers. Tonight, Kate and I will be presenting the draft climate action framework. And so this is a document that's been developed based on board, CAC, and staff discussions over the last 2 years to frame the district's strategy for responding to climate change. And tonight, staff's going to be requesting acceptance of the draft climate action framework and also authorization for a contract for final design and layout. And so the text has been pretty, has gone through a fairly robust review process at this point with staff, and has also been reviewed by advisors at Smith Partners and Stantec. And so tonight is really a checkpoint to see if the board is comfortable with the framing of the strategy and the near-term actions before moving forward with finalizing the document to be shared externally. Go ahead, Kate's driving the slides here for me. And so I'll start things off by walking through the purpose of the framework, the work to date to develop it, and some of the findings and principles that came out of that process. And then I'll be turning it over to Kate to review the 3 pillars of the framework, the near-term actions that have been identified, and then finally the proposal for the design and layout of the publication. And so the reason we started this process of developing the climate action framework is that, we know our watershed is already seeing the impacts of climate change. We, of course, had the wettest decade on record, including the flood of record in 2014, and we've seen numerous impacts on both our natural and built environment, such as stream damage along Minnehaha Creek that we received FEMA funding to repair, the surface and groundwater issues that we've seen now in Minneapolis, as well as Carver County, as well as permit applications that have come through for infrastructure changes to deal with the increased precipitation. And so we recognize the need to clearly define our role and strategy for responding, and to understand how that fits within the broader governance framework so that we can understand kind of where we should focus our efforts to provide the biggest impact, and so that we're in a position to be proactive rather than reacting as we see these events happen. Go ahead, Kate. And so we embarked on a discovery process to explore and build clarity and consensus around what our role should be. And so that involved discussions with the CAC, the board, and staff to explore kind of these 4 areas of questions. So first, what's happening in terms of the climate science? What are the trends that we're seeing for our area? And then what impacts is that having on both the natural built environment within our watershed? We also explored governance, so what's being done already, and we reviewed existing plans at the state, regional, and local levels to get a better understanding of what others are doing and how our role might fit with that. And then finally, digging into what our role should be by exploring our strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and kind of how we fit into that mosaic. Go ahead, Kate. And so some of the findings of that process is that Minnesota is and will continue to become warmer and wetter. And this is resulting in a range of impacts to both natural and built systems such as flooding, erosion, stress on native species, stress on infrastructure, among others. And from our governance scan, we learned more about kind of the mosaic of plans that are out there and the roles that are starting to take shape. And a lot of the plans that we saw are focused more on the mitigation side, which we know is critical as the state is not on track to meet its goals for greenhouse gas emissions. And a lot of them are still really evolving and taking shape, and Kate will touch on a few in a moment in terms of recent progress on plans at the state and regional level. And then we also explored kind of the district's strengths and opportunities. And a few of the things that came out of that were that, we're, as a data-driven organization, we are really in a good position to provide the sound science and the system understanding of what's happening to our hydrology, and what those impacts might be across political boundaries. And we also talked a lot about, our regional role as important to being able to convene and coordinate efforts across those boundaries. And then we also talked about, our implementation role as being an agency that's focused on high impact projects and policy, and that really being where we can probably add the most effort from an implementation standpoint. And then finally, we also explored our work to date and how that can contribute to both adaptation and mitigation. And that's something that we can, do more in terms of looking at our work through that lens and quantifying benefits in those areas. Go ahead, Kate. And so from all that, we kind of boiled that down into 4 guiding principles that are included in the framework. And so the first 2 are existing organizational guiding principles of sound science and partnership that were really reinforced by these discussions. And again, just the role we see as being able to provide kind of that data-driven system understanding and to really bring people together and work in partnership to identify solutions at a system scale. And then we also talked about just kind of the proportional emphasis on our role in adaptation, flood adaptation specifically, as being the area that we can probably provide the most value, but recognizing we also have a role to play in mitigation and that our work contributes to that as well. And then finally, again, just reinforcing the regional role and really leveraging that and kind of playing to our strengths and working within our sphere of influence of really taking the systems approach and focusing on the work that's going to provide that system scale benefit. And so I will turn it over to Kate to step through how these findings and principles then led to the 3 pillars, and she can dig in a little more on those and the actions that have been identified.
Great, thank you very much, Becky. Good evening, Board of Managers. So from this internal planning process that Becky's just walked us through over the last few years, the district developed its climate action framework through its 3 pillars: understand and predict, convene and plan, implement, measure, and adapt. And so these 3 pillars really set our direction for our climate strategy and make up our climate action framework. And so pillar 1, understand and predict, is currently underway, and it's really getting at the district working to identify knowledge gaps and really building out our organizational capabilities, really so we can better understand and predict the impacts of climate change within the watershed. And so for the district to really effectively adapt to climate change, and so that's really thinking about some of the things that Becky just touched on, right? So we're going to see increase in like heat events, you know, precipitation. So we're having that kind of more volatile precipitation patterns. All of that is going to need ongoing investments in future tools and technology so we can really understand spatially what is happening across the watershed. So thinking about, you know, stream flow, water levels, pollutant transports, and other watershed level responses. And in pillar 1, we also need to develop these tools to really leverage the regional and localized climate data to conduct scenario planning and vulnerability assessment. So this is really you know, touching on our 2D pilot model and our 2D watershed model work. And what we're trying to get at is, right, you know, trying to understand, you know, where is flooding maybe going to occur in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, as our climate is changing. And so this technology really allows us to assess risk and understand potential impacts that will be shared within communities to really evaluate what investments and actions will produce the greatest system-wide benefit. And so with that system-wide benefit, right, we are crossing jurisdictional boundaries, working across cities and counties. And so with that, we also recognize that no single entity, right, has all the jurisdictional authority or resources or ownership to, of, you know, natural and built infrastructure really needed to increase climate resiliency. And so for addressing climate change, right, and all of these impacts that come along with it, we know it can't be done in the silo. So it really does require that coordination and collaboration across various levels of government. And so for the district, right, you know, coming out of this work that Becky just touched on, we recognize we have, you know, the strong technical capability, particularly coming out of pillar 1 with understand and predict. You know, we have that outreach capabilities to really position ourselves as a connector to really help engage and guide development for a more cohesive climate strategy across our watershed to respond to climate change. And so part of this with pillar 2 really is we need to bring together our partners, so our municipalities, our cities, our state agencies, to really learn from our partners what issues are they facing and how are our partners planning to approach climate mitigation and adaptation to build resiliency. They also recognize, right, we need to share out this technical understanding of both current and future vulnerabilities and risk across the watershed from our pillar 1, understand and predict. And then from this learning and sharing, right, we can really align our goals and our priorities and create strategies across our partners. And so all of this really is allowing us then to get towards implementation in pillar 3. So where we're actually implementing the mitigation and adaptation in coordination with our partners. And as Becky talked about, right, this can be a range of different ways to implement, but in particular projects and policies will be one of the main levers that we have to respond to climate change. And so with this, over the next 5 years, as we're looking to our 2027 watershed management plan, so our next 10-year document that will have climate action within it, we know we'll be building out these tools and technologies to really allow us to assess and predict vulnerabilities and risk across the watershed. And so this technical understanding then will support that multi-jurisdictional informed decision-making that really is essential for the effective implementation of climate action across our watershed. And so in your packet, attachment 1 in your memo is the climate action framework. And there in that appendix A is listing out these near-term actions for the next 5 years. And so this really provides us a roadmap for our internal work, how we're aligning resources, and really guide how we will work externally with our partners in climate planning as we work towards our 2027 watershed management plan. And here on your screen, you can kind of see these near-term actions over the next 5 years, broken down by these 3 pillars. Understand and predict really is right, that watershed model, getting that understanding of what's actually happening at a watershed level, still quantifying past benefits so that really can inform our future planning. For convene and plan, we have both internal and external planning that's needed over the next 5 years. And then for implementation, measure and adapt, with our 2027 plan, this will become more robust and a larger list, but there is still things to implement over the next 5 years, including projects and programs for our landscape improvements that have both mitigation and adaptation benefits. We can add in our operations and continue with modernization around our dam and explore that. And so with this process, right, to really provide clarity about our work and how it will integrate and align climate action with the state of Minnesota, our regional partners and cities, to really make our watershed more resilient and benefit the communities that we are here to serve. I did want to speak to a couple of more recent documents coming out at the state and regional level, as Becky had referenced earlier. And so I emailed earlier on March 1st, which seems like a long time ago, these 3 documents out to the board of managers. And I just wanted to really talk about kind of how they overlap with our own climate action framework. And so the first one, the state of Minnesota, earlier this year, they released their draft climate action framework. And this document really is recognizing that, again, right, we can't address climate change in silos, we need to work together. And they laid out a handful of goals for the state level. And in our own climate action framework, we really identified 2 goals that really align with our own. So that's really that natural lands, and then also the resilience building at a local level. And so with that plan, it's again trying to communicate and understand how can we connect and support each other for climate action. Hennepin County, they released their climate action plan in 2021. We provided comments as they developed their climate action plan. And we also, sat down at a table and kind of started mapping out how do their climate action plan goals overlap with our own priorities. And those conversations will continue to move forward over the next 5 years as we work towards our 2027 plan. And then the Met Council, they're running a very similar process to the one we are running. They will be providing their climate action plan later this year. They did apply an equity framework to this document as they're developing out and refining their own goals and strategies. We also saw an equity lens applied to Hennepin County and the state's climate action framework. And so where we are in this kind of longer range planning context, back in 2014, right, our balanced urban ecology policy really set the stage and is kind of the heart of our district and our work. This was incorporated into our 10-year plan in 2017, our watershed management plan. And since the last few years, we've gone through this internal climate planning, and where we are today is really this climate action framework, right? We're laying out our climate strategy. And so as we wrap up this kind of internally focused planning process, the next is working on these near-term actions over the next 5 years and really engaging externally with our partners to really make sure we're informed for our 2027 next 10-year plan, and has climate action actually incorporated into that. And right, as we're thinking about over the next 5 years, as we need to communicate out to our partners, that's where background stories comes in. Our climate action framework, we want to make sure that it's really user-friendly, that it's eye-catching, it pulls our readers in so we can clearly communicate what our climate strategy is and how we want to work with our partners. And so background stories, we've been using them recently on 2 projects, including that at a glance with the Nokomis white paper. And I have a couple screenshots here on the slide for you to see. Next month, you'll also be seeing a document for our stakeholder engagement kickoff work as well. And Background Stories also is really uniquely qualified. They are a local company. They've worked with the city of Minneapolis on their 2040 plan. And they also worked with IPCC, so that intergovernmental panel on climate change, providing graphics and visualization for them. And so with this, we did request a proposal from Background Stories for basically design and layout of our climate action framework. And so before I go to staff recommendations, I did kind of want to talk about kind of the next steps here, just to give you a sense of where this could go. And so if this evening we move forward with the resolution, staff could then come back in early Q3 of this year with the final publication that's graphically designed and bring that for formal adoption for our climate action framework. At that same time that we could be recommending our strategy for really sharing this document externally with our partners as we prepare for climate engagement in 2023. And before we go to staff recommendations and the resolution content, I did want to stop here and just hear from the board. How do we feel about the climate strategy? Are there any questions with this document and the near-term actions?
President White, you're muted.
I actually got jumped out a little while ago. So are there questions for Ms. Christopher, Ms. Moran? Or Mr. Manager Hejmati?
Thank you. I remember when we were working on this, one of the points of conversation we had was that we would be talking to some of our partners about our plan to make sure that what we are doing coordinates with them too, and that what we do doesn't come as a surprise to them. Can you give me an idea of how that has been progressing?
Yeah, I can start at least and see if anybody wants to add on. I think we've been coordinating, I think Kate mentioned, pretty closely with Hennepin County, and also having conversations with Met Council and in terms of their planning processes and some of the similarities we see in areas of kind of overlap and connection, and starting to lay the groundwork for some partnerships there. And then I know, and I can let James jump in as well. I think he's been having conversations, as he's, tied to the rollout of the Nokomis white paper and things like that with, various county and city partners as well. And so we're starting to kind of lay the foundation and let people know the direction we're headed before kind of doing more of a robust engagement process that'll be starting early in 2023. But so far, our direction and strategy has been well received and seems to make sense to the folks we've been talking with. But I can let James speak to that more.
Yeah, Manager Hejmati, just reinforce the things that Becky mentioned. As we've been making the rounds, President White and I have outlined the 3 pillars of the climate framework, but really founded on the insights that we've drawn from our work, looking at how the watershed's actually been impacted, tying that to climate data that we see at a state and regional level, and using that as a way to really kind of provide context and make sense of why these are our strategic guideposts. And we've done that with county commissioners, We've done it with state legislators. Becky mentioned the Met Council. And I think where we are right now, the bulk of our investments to prepare ourselves, to prepare our communities for adapting to the increased volumes of water that we're going to see over time as a product of climate change is really on pillar one, and our 2D model and our investments in sensor networks and those sorts of things. And we've engaged, pretty much all of our cities and all of the partners that we've just mentioned in obtaining letters or resolutions of support for our ask to the LCCMR. So we have support from all of the creek communities and the park board, many of our upstream lake communities, counties, the Department of Natural Resources, Environmental Quality Board, Metropolitan Council, United States Geologic Survey. So I think we've done a fair amount of canvassing in terms of how the watershed is going to be impacted and has been impacted by climate change, and laid out our logic model and our strategy, and then asked for support to take really progressive, bold steps on pillar one. And we've seen that report really show up across federal, state, county, regional, and local agencies in spades. So.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So I mean, essentially, I wanted to be sure that we're not surprising anyone if we put out a document, but sounds like everybody has been told about it and they all agree with it. And so when it comes out, it'll just confirm for them what we've already said. Thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
Manager Maxwell.
Well, basically, Shimani just asked the same question I was going to ask. I agree with the framework so far. The pillar is to really know what we're going to do with it first, and then later on to convey to all our other partners. But I think we got to work more on each city to make sure that they understand exactly the direction we're going to. But that'll come down the line, and you pretty much answered the question. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions at this point? If not, we'll let Ms. continue.
Great, thank you. And so with that, based on the Board of Managers review, staff recommendation is to accept the climate action framework this evening and authorize the district administrator to enter into a contract with background stories with a not to exceed 10,500. And so that would be staff recommendation to approve resolution 22-029.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved, Hejmati.
Thank you, Manager Hejmati. Is there a second?
Maxwell second, I guess.
Thank you, Manager Maxwell. Are there any additional questions before we vote on the resolution? Seeing no hands. Voting on the resolution, Manager Hejmati.
Aye.
Manager Miller.
Aye.
Manager Sando.
Manager Sando, aye.
Thank you. Manager Loftus.
Aye.
Manager Olson. Manager Maxwell.
Aye.
And Manager White votes aye. The resolution is adopted. Thank you, everyone.
President White,
Yes.
just to cap the board's action on that tonight, I just wanted to say a few words, if that's okay with you.
Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to thank both the Citizens Advisory Committee and the Board of Managers for all of their vision on this work and strategic insight. We started this, really picked it up early in 2020, just pre-pandemic. We had Kenny Blumenfeld, the state climatologist, join the Watershed District in reviewing climate data, and we've been working on it since. I think with more intentional focus late 2021, where we picked things back up with the Board of Managers, and we had, I felt like a great series of insightful discussions with the board, where the board really helped us set direction and guideposts for how the Watershed District can both be focused, but really impactful and actionable on climate in a way that doesn't send us in a new direction, but aligns really clearly with our balanced urban ecology philosophy. And as Becky mentioned, that idea of working at that interface of land use and water that we embarked on in 2014 is more relevant now than ever as climate change drives impacts for both the built environment and natural environment. And then I just wanted to acknowledge our policy planning group. They've done a lot of good work on the Land and Water Partnership Program and other good policy work and grant tracking and all sorts of policy development. But this, I think, is a good capstone to their work over the last year, and wanted to just say thank you and congratulate Becky and Kate for all of their hard work, working with the board, the CAC, but also leveraging the staff input of our climate team internally, folks like Tiffany, Brian, Kaylee, Helen, and everybody on staff. I think Becky and Kate have done a lot of great work to get this to this point. I'm excited to see it get into layout.
Kudos.
So thank you.
Kudos. And certainly the board was behind us from the beginning. We had a retreat about 3 years ago where the topic was climate change, and we've come a long way since then. It feels really good. The next item is 11.3, Resolution 2030, Ms. Schaufler.
Confirming that you can see the presentation and hear me.
We can.
Yes.
All right. Good evening, President White, managers. Tonight, staff is requesting acceptance of the Lake Nokomis groundwater and surface water evaluation and the University of Minnesota's technical review of the evaluation. There we go. So what I'm going to do tonight is try to concisely and quickly walk through the evaluation. I know this has been a few year study that's been before you a few times. Just recap the water issues, the convening of the multi-agency team, how that team approached the evaluation, walk through the findings, and with the conclusions and next steps that the evaluation is recommending, and then talk about the U of M's third-party technical review. So as you just heard from Kate and Becky, we know the past decade's been very wet, and the DNR State Climatology Office, we now know that between 2013 and 2019, we've had the wettest 7 years on record. And in 2014, shortly after this wet period began, this is when the property owners near Lake Nokomis began to report water issues to the city of Minneapolis. And shown here were the 21 reported water issues that were reported to the city of Minneapolis. We certainly have heard there's been more issues than this, but these are the ones that have been reported. And what the team did was broke these down into 3 different areas of concern. So Nokomis Parkway had 3 homes with reported wet basements. West Nokomis had 13 homes with reported wet basements. And then to the south there, Solomon Park had 5 homes with reported wet backyards. So in response to these water concerns, the city of Minneapolis assembled a multi-agency team to evaluate what could be contributing to the issues and to help identify mitigation measures for homeowners and community leaders. And really the expertise of each agency was needed because surface water and groundwater crosses several jurisdictions across Minnesota. And since 2017, the team has invested over $200,000 to install 6 new groundwater wells, gather additional data about precipitation, geology, hydrology, how the residential development occurred across this landscape, and then also gathering new information on groundwater and surface water levels. And all this information was analyzed to arrive at key findings and conclusions. And while the team was working on doing this evaluation, there was also a lot of effort put in place to keep the community informed. So whether that was through community meetings, public open houses, and then also several meetings with elected officials themselves. So next, I'm gonna just talk quickly through the evaluation approach. Here's the cover of the Nokomis white paper. So what we did first was look at geology and hydrology. So how was the landscape around Lake Nokomis? How did it naturally form to hold and store water? And then looking at residential development, how was that landscape reshaped? between 1910s and the 1950s for housing and parks. And then looking at precipitation and climate change, how did the influence of record drought while the landscape was being developed influence decisions, and then how has climate change over the last decade influenced the weather. And then with groundwater recharge and levels, understanding the relationship between record rainfall, groundwater recharge rates, and local groundwater levels relative to the homes that are experiencing water issues. And then we looked at Lake Nokomis, and again, looking at those water levels relative to the homes experiencing issues, and the same thing with Minnehaha Creek. What was the level of the creek relative to the homes? And then lastly, we looked at what's happened to the landscape in the area over the past decade. How is the area development? How has it redeveloped? And how have potentially stormwater management as part of that influenced hydrology? So taking all of these 7, what we called factors, the team then analyzed all of these to determine if they were or were not contributing to the water issues. So next I'm going to walk through the findings of the evaluation. So starting, 11,000 years ago, we learned that really the glaciers have shaped the landscape that is around us. And they created a really wet and water-rich landscape. And as the climate warmed, many of those natural lakes that had formed after the glaciers melted started to decrease in size. And when they decreased in size, peat began to form, or peat is made up of organic plant material, began to form in those former lake basins. And we know that peat is a wetland soil, and it can act like a sponge. And because of that, we know that peat can cause water to accumulate or perch above it. Our second finding was that looking back to the 1853 original land survey, we know that South Minneapolis was very abundant with lakes and wetlands. So this map is showing the current day wetland boundaries of around and the stream boundaries. And then this map is adding with the blue is what existed in 1853. So you can start to understand how the landscape was changed over those past 160 some years, and how approximately 60% of the area's wetlands have now been filled and changed the landscape's natural hydrology. The third finding is that between 1910s to the 1950s, some significant landscape changes happened across this area. So taking that big former wetland area that was Lake Nokomis, the park board endeavored a 4-year project that removed 2.5 million cubic yards of wetland, peat, and lake soil from the lake, and placed that soil over low-lying wetlands and peat bogs adjacent to the lake. So what that ended up doing was converting what was once a shallow water wetland into the present day Lake Nokomis that is much deeper. And what that did while making the lake deeper, it also made the lake less expansive, and eventually resulted in the reduced footprint of water by 100 acres. And here's just another picture of once the part of the lake was dredged, what some of these filled areas looked like in the northwest side of the lake. So next, understanding how the landscape formed and then how it was adjusted for development, we looked at the precipitation records during that development. And by doing this, it became very clear that the residential development that happened between the 1920s and 50s coincided with the driest period on record for the Twin Cities. And during this time, the Twin Cities averaged about 25 inches of rain. And also during this record dry 40 years, Lake Nokomis fell to its lowest recorded level of 809.67 feet, which current day, the OHW, that's about 5.7 feet lower than it was today. So if you were to go out to the lake today and imagine it 5.7 feet lower, that was the elevation of the lake when these homes were being built. Next, we look at what happened shortly after the area was developed. And what we learned was pretty much immediately after the area was developed and infrastructure went in underground, the underlying wetland soils and peat soils cause problems for infrastructure, roads, and parkland. Sewer lines constructed in the 1930s pretty much needed almost immediate repair because of sinking and sewer line breaks. And then we also learned that peat bogs up to 16 feet deep were encountered during road construction in 1941 and caused public safety issues. And a picture of that peat bog is pictured here after a boy had drowned in it. And then the picture on the right is city workers pumping water out. And then we also were able to find some extensive work progress administration records showing how the area around Nokomis was regraded 30 some years after the dredging of the lake, because all that peat soil and wetland soil that had been excavated started to settle and crack. And here's just some really great pictures just showing the amount of effort that went into essentially just hand digging up all of that peat soil that had cracked over time. And then here's showing a picture from 1938 of peat that's more than 15 feet deep that WPA workers were digging up. So understanding that there is peat in the area and that it's been significantly moved around, we realized that our understanding of all of the peat, location of peat and the relocation of it is incomplete. So we, in looking at those WPA records, note that it identified that peat was moved from Lake Nokomis up towards Minnehaha Creek. That's where you see that black circle around Minnehaha Creek. It also talked about how peat was removed from other lake and used to fill some depression areas along the south side of Lake Nokomis. So we understand that the Minnesota Geological Survey map has a decent understanding of where peat is, but looking at recent soil drillings for wells and also understanding where historical infrastructure issues have occurred, we know that peat exists in smaller pockets that aren't able to be completely documented by these broader county geologic surveys. So next, understanding how the area was developed and then the infrastructure issues that occurred, we looked at what's gone on over the last decade when these issues have started to arise. So we now, again, as Kate and Becky alluded, we just went through the wettest decade in record. So when the areas being developed, remind you that the average annual precipitation was 25 inches. Now it's jumped up to 34.31. So when you compound that, every year for 10 years, that's equal to over 100 inches or 8 feet more water fell on the Twin Cities in the 2010s than during any decade when the homes were built. And on top of that, not only was the wettest decade, but we had the wettest 7 years on record between 2013 and 2019, which is equivalent to having an extra year's worth of rain during that time. So in addition to just more rain falling, we also have more rain falling outside of the growing season, more in April, which is kind of occurring right now outside our office here, and in November when groundwater recharge is the greatest. So what we learned is combining all the information is that record rainfall that was falling during the 2010s combined with the peat soils that have been excavated and buried and moved around are the driver of the water issues in the Lake Nokomis area. Because we know buried peat soils will restrict the downward movement of rainfall into the ground. And that is what is forming these perched groundwater systems that as an example is pictured here. And further, when peat is wet, it remains wet for a lengthy period of time. And this might explain why people continue to have issues in 2020 and in 2021, even though we were in designated drought conditions and the creek and Lake Nokomis were on the lower side. So next I'm going to walk through what we found when we looked at the groundwater recharge and levels across Lake Nokomis and the broader Twin Cities. So what we learned in looking at precipitation falling and then mapping the local shallow wells by Nokomis and Solomon Park, we saw that they were starting to respond in similar ways. But then what we did was we applied another well near Starring Lake, which is in Eden Prairie. And if you look at the green and gray line here, they are very, very similar. In fact, they're statistically correlated. And what that showed the team and demonstrated was that precipitation is driving the groundwater levels, because as you see here, you have groundwater across the Twin Cities responding in the same way to precipitation. And therefore, that means that Lake Nokomis and Minnehaha Creek are not driving the groundwater levels in the area. Continue to look at groundwater in Lake Nokomis and Minnehaha Creek. We also then looked at the elevations of the basements in that West Nokomis area where most of the issues were occurring. And what we did here was then we plotted understanding where those homes in the basement sit relative to those water levels. So here you can see Minnehaha Creek at the bottom here, and it sits almost 19 feet lower than these basements. Then we added the Lake Nokomis level on above that. You can see again some significant separation. And then here's the shallow groundwater at Lake Nokomis, and then the shallow groundwater at Solomon Park. So what you can see here is that the regional shallow water table, Lake Nokomis and Minnehaha Creek are not contributing to these water issues for most of the basements in this Lake Nokomis area. And that perch groundwater is the cause. And then the last factor we looked at again was how is redevelopment over the past decade, has that contributed to the water issues? And we found that it is not. There's been limited redevelopment, and then in addition, any of that redevelopment that requires stormwater management contributed such an insignificant amount of recharge into the groundwater system that it cannot be contributing to the water issues. So next, what I'm going to walk through is taking all those findings of those 7 factors. The team found that the 3 Lake Nokomis areas concerns experience water issues for slightly different reasons. And this is again due to the characteristics of each location, how it responded to the record-breaking precipitation over the past decade, based on the geologic history of the area, the movement of peat soils around the area, and then how that land was developed after that. And then what is the respective elevations of each area of concern. So next I'm going to walk through the distinction of each of these areas. So first I'm going to cover Nokomis Parkway. So the map on the right shows that these are the ones on the top right closest to the lake. And if we look at those 1853 original land surveys, we know that the homes here were built over former wetlands, and actually some of the homes within the former footprint of Lake Nokomis, and they're below the OHW of Lake Nokomis. So if knowing that information, the record-breaking precipitation that we've experienced over the last decade and groundwater recharge are only going to exacerbate existing water issues due to this area's geology. And because Minnehaha Creek has been lower than the Nokomis Weir and lower than these homes, it is not a contributing factor to these water issues. Moving southwest to West Nokomis, and this is where the majority of the basement issues were happening. So these homes, again, looking at that 1853 land survey, showed that they were built to adjacent filled wetlands, over peat deposits, and over a former stream channel that drained out of Mother Lake into Lake Nokomis. And looking at the elevation data, we know that the regional shallow water table, Lake Nokomis and Minnehaha Creek are not contributing to these basement issues because of that 5 to 9 feet vertical separation. And what we believe is that the record-breaking precipitation is essentially being trapped by those peat soils and perching water above the peat soils as shown here in this diagram, and causing these very localized perched groundwater systems. And then lastly, moving south to Solomon Park, people here were having backyard water concerns, so standing water in their backyards. And looking at this area, these homes were built on or adjacent to former wetlands, and in some cases existing wetlands that have mapped peat soils. So knowing that the peat soils are there, you're naturally is going to prevent that record-breaking precipitation from soaking into the ground and result in standing water. And again, because of the vertical separation, Lake Nokomis and the creek are not contributing to these water issues. So what I'm going to do next is then transition into what the recommendation and next steps that have come out of this evaluation. So what we're recommending is, because the water issues here are driven by geologic history, past land usages, and climate change in the form of record rainfall, it's recommended that property owners experiencing issues consider implementing a range of mitigation measures on site to protect their property. And pictured here in the top right are just some examples of things that could be done by property owners. And then beyond the property owner recommendations, the next steps for the local governments and the multi-agency team fall under 3 categories. So we have quantify, which the University of Minnesota, the USGS, and the Minnesota Geological Survey are going to come in and leverage some already acquired state funds to really come in and map in a finer detail where these peat soils and perch groundwater tables might be. And the city of Minneapolis will be supporting that work. And then under our assist bucket, the city is going to continue to leverage guidelines and existing laws and frameworks and see how they can assist affected property owners and understand how what's happening at Nokomis, how that ranks in priority across broader across the city with other water issues, and also try to work in identifying other resources that can support residents. So the city's already posted some resources on their website for residents to look at, to consider when they're implementing their own mitigation measures for their property. And then the last bucket of work is monitors. So the county is going to continue to collect and monitor groundwater from the wells near Lake Nokomis and Solomon Park. The park board is going to continue to collect and analyze Lake Nokomis water levels and operate the weir. And then lastly, the watershed district is going to continue to implement and expand our real-time sensor network, including we have a real-time sensor at Lake Nokomis currently. And then this is a real concise way of framing what Kate and Becky just walked through. But what the multi-agency team wanted to take away from this evaluation was just all the lessons learned from bringing a group of folks together from city up to federal government, and use the Nokomis area water issues as a case study on what can we all be doing and how should we be working together to move forward. So here you see the 3 pillars of the district's climate action plan, and just talking about how the agencies will continue to work together under those pillars. And then within Appendix A of the evaluation, it goes into more depth of what each agency is doing. So that is the evaluation itself. Next, I'm going to transition into what the university's technical review of the evaluation found. And the U's report was included in the packet. And the U found that the approach and findings of the evaluation was accurate. The biggest area of uncertainty that they flagged was just that data gap for the location of peat soils and perch groundwater. And what I've included here in this slide is a map of the Minnesota Geological Survey's data inventory. So this is showing all the data that they are able to use or had access to when developing those county geological maps. And you can see there's just a pretty big gap around Lake Nokomis, which explains why there's a lot of these smaller pockets of peat and perch groundwater weren't able to be mapped. But thankfully, the U of M is situated to fill these gaps. They were able to leverage state funds and are eager and ready to go, and are currently already working with City of Minneapolis staff to begin implementing the work to go in and map and quantify where those peat and perch groundwater tables might be. So the next steps from here is with the watershed district's acceptance of the evaluation is next week. The park board is set to accept the evaluation. And then we are tentatively planning a public town hall to roll this information out publicly in partnership with the city of Minneapolis and Council Member Koski's office on May 31st. And before the board considers staff requests, I just want to take a moment and pause to acknowledge the organizational effort that's gone into this evaluation. Every person at the district has touched this work in some way, whether that be attending technical meetings, meeting with policymakers, reviewing the 100-page evaluation, several drafts of it, creating the maps, which provide the visual foundation for the evaluation, reviewing and gathering water level data, and then at the end, having folks review that at a glance document to make sure that made sense. And it's truly been a full team effort across staff and the board of managers. And I just wanted to take a moment and say that. So with that, the board of managers is requested to accept the Lake Nokomis groundwater and surface water evaluation and the University of Minnesota's technical review of the evaluation. And with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Schaffler. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved, Hejmadi.
Thank you, Manager Hejmadi. Is there a second?
Second, Miller.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Manager Olson, you have a question?
Yes. First of all, I saw the 4 key people that we sent to those meetings, and we had a tremendous representation. The 135-page document is spectacular and driven by a political interest. The subject was a big deal, and you folks have stepped up to the challenge and did a fantastic job, not only doing the work but representing us. From the research that was put into this, right to the interviews I was reading last week in the Star Tribune. So well done, everybody. 2 questions I had, though. This forthcoming data collection on the evaluation from the University of Minnesota from Joe Magner. What's the time frame on that project? I'm assuming they're going to fill in the voids, but what's their target?
Yeah, Manager Olson, managers, good question. They have already been meeting with homeowners. They got the funds last fall, I think in September. So they are starting to just try to pinpoint where they want to bring in a drilling rig, where do they want to focus their level of effort. So they are ready to go, essentially, and looking to, leverage that town hall at the end of May to maybe get more people that are willing to let them come in. So essentially, they'll be moving here in the next month or so. So that it's a nice, immediate next step that's happening as we roll this out.
It's not a multi-year effort or anything like that. Okay. The other thing that had a question, you showed a diagram of what people can do in their homes. And one was to put in a sump pump. But another one I noticed, it said replace your sanitary sewer lines. Can you explain how that helps them? Yeah, Manager Olson. So around this area, in addition to people noting that they were having water in their basements or, standing water in their backyards, people had expressed concerns over, they felt there had a lot of increasing private sanitary line issues. And there's been some Star Tribune articles about that as well, because when contractors are coming in to replace it, they're opening up the road and they're standing water, which again helps explain this perch groundwater system, which then requires dewatering and is essentially tripling the cost of what used to be a simple replacement. We've heard from the city of Minneapolis that in addition to, the record rainfall, that the infrastructure down here is just old. You're talking 80, 90 years old.
So if you haven't already replaced that, it's probably time to do that just to be proactive and not find yourself in a situation where it's causing you issues.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions for Ms. Schaufler? This is a wonderfully coordinated, researched, presented effort, and I just can't say enough great things about the work that's been done. Let's vote then on the resolution.
I just got one comment,
Like,
if I could.
go right ahead.
The report is comprehensive and believable, which the conclusions are almost inarguable. But I think the graphics and everything that's in here is going to make it so easy to understand. That's really well done. I really want to commend you for the work that you've done on this, because it's, the citizens aren't going to read and believe 90 pages, but they look at the graphics and they can get a quick understanding of what issues they're facing. So thanks so much for doing such good work on this.
Yeah, thank you, Manager Miller. And the maps, I mean, Alex Steele has spent countless hours creating those, and like I said, really creates the visual foundation of the paper. So I completely agree, and Alex deserves kudos for that.
Thank you. Manager Hejmati.
Yes, I also, want to add my congratulations that everybody else has said of a superb job on the report. I also want to congratulate the entire team for the wonderful coordination that they've done. The convening process that we always try to do. It is exemplary in the way it was coordinated between various agencies, so that everybody's input was there, everybody was consulted, and everybody agreed on it. And so having agreement with everyone between all of the different agencies is really critical in something as an issue that's as difficult as this, that's likely to have other repercussions over time, and sets up a wonderful precedent for dealing with things in the future. So I want to congratulate our team on working so effectively in finessing that whole process. Thank you.
Manager Hejmati. Other comments from managers? Voting then to adopt the resolution accepting the Nokomis paper and the U of M review. Manager Maxwell.
Aye.
Manager Olson.
Aye.
Manager White says aye. Manager Loftus.
Aye.
Manager Sando.
Aye.
Manager Miller.
Aye.
Manager Hejmati.
Aye.
The resolution is approved and we have adopted the paper. Thank you very much. Ms. Schaufler is presenting once again, item 11.4, resolution 2231 regarding the revised interim maintenance protocol for the boardwalk.
Thank you, President White. President White, managers, tonight staff is requesting adoption of a revised interim maintenance protocol for the Minnehaha Preserve Boardwalk. On November 18th, the board authorized seasonal closure of the boardwalk system to ensure safety was upheld during the winter months, as ice and snow accumulating on top of the safety markings and decking boards, which were patched with plywood, make it difficult for users to know the condition of the boardwalk surface below their feet. And a picture of the current closure, which was installed over this winter, is shown here. And recently, as snow and ice conditions, hopefully, are no longer present or going to be present, the district must evaluate how to manage the boardwalk as a public facility in these non-winter months. And staff performed an inspection on April 22nd, and a picture from that inspection is shown here. and indicated that at that time, the boardwalk posed no different safety risk than it did in the fall of 2021 prior to the seasonal closure. And because the district's in the process of designing the reconstruction of the boardwalk facility and a review of safety and use considerations that remain similar to this time last year, staff continues to believe that there is benefit in limiting the investment of maintaining the boardwalk into isolated plywood patching, and thus is recommending an updated inspection and maintenance protocol, which is attached to the board resolution. And what this revised interim maintenance protocol will consist of is biweekly inspections of the surface structures, again, marking boards with signs of deterioration with fluorescent orange spray paint, patching holes with plywood, and posting signage. And we will, staff will employ these measures similar across the site as it deems appropriate based on the setting, and to make sure users are being alerted to the deteriorating decking material. The only change, a change from the maintenance protocol is given the planned reconstruction of the system during the winter of 2022 to 2023, staff no longer recommends batch replacement of the decking boards. So staff tonight is recommending the adoption of this revised interim maintenance protocol, as it will allow the watershed district to protect public safety while preserving public use of the boardwalk and efficiently using public funds during the period prior to the district's implementation of the reconstruction of the boardwalk system. And with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Schaffler. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved, Hajmati.
Thank you, Manager Hajmati. Is there a second?
Second, Sando.
Manager Sando seconds. Any questions for Ms. Schaufler?
Yeah,
Manager
just one.
Manager Olson, go ahead.
Tiffany, do we have, I saw that picture of the plywood, and the city of Minneapolis goes to great lengths to grind down sidewalks that are uneven by less than 1/4 of an inch. And you've got plywood there that people could trip over. Is that some sort of are we patching and creating an obstacle course?
Manager Olson, managers. So what we're doing and what we'll be doing as soon as if the board approves reopening tonight is spraying those plywood patches with fluorescent orange spray paint. So that's usually, they look bright and orange, people can be alerted to them, but over the winter that faded. And we also at every entry point have signage posted that there's uneven surfaces and alerting people to the, the risk of the boardwalk. So we feel that we've alerted people to that, spray painting it, trying to protect their safety.
I'll be so glad when this is fixed.
Thank you, Manager Maxwell.
No, Bill had the same concern I did. That looks like maybe a 1/4 inch plywood sticking up, and I think it's just a trip hazard for people. So yeah, if we spray it and some other stuff, but I don't know what else to do with it. But that was my concern also when I looked at it.
Thank you, Manager Miller.
I think that the warning signs at the entrances should be bigger. They're tiny, polite, artistic signs that you easily ignore. Whereas you put a sign up, say warning, danger ahead, proceed at your own risk. So, rather than some artistic sign.
No lifeguard on duty.
Yeah, no lifeguard on duty. That's good.
Manager Maxwell, your hand is still up, or did you raise it again?
No, I thought I lowered it, but I guess I didn't.
Any other questions for Ms. Schaufler?
Manager Sando, just,
Go ahead.
with all the signage, you can have all kinds of signage. Somebody still trips and still sues our organization. So just a thought on that, even with signage, there's a lawsuit out there, could happen.
Thank you, Manager Sando. We have Mr. Holtman with us tonight. Ms. Schaufler or Mr. Holtman, would you care to answer that?
Well, Madam Chair, Manager Sando, managers. First, just my apology, my technology isn't working properly, so I can't get my camera on here. But there's, of course, always a risk of someone being injured on district property in a district facility. The staff throughout the process of addressing this issue has taken care to consider what are the best ways to minimize that risk. And in addition, have sought to bring to you for your consideration and ultimately your decision as to the protocol that should be used. As a practical matter, obviously you want to minimize the safety risk as much as you can, consistent with all the other considerations that you're weighing, which includes having the facility available as a public amenity, as well as the cost of managing it until we do get it back into proper shape. From a strictly legal standpoint, the framework really kind of follows the ordinary reasoning that you would pursue in making the decision, which is that there is protection given from liability to public agencies who manage public properties if those are managed carefully and thoughtfully. And that's why staff does come to you and present their recommendation and ask you to consider all of these several different factors. And if there are additional measures that you think would be useful, such as larger signage, Manager Miller suggested, certainly those should be raised and included in your policy. But otherwise, if you make your judgment carefully and those are a part of the public record, certainly you don't want someone to be injured. Certainly you can be sued, but you should be pretty well protected in that case.
Thank you, Mr. Holtman. A question I have, Ms. Schaufler, will there be times that this will need to be closed down briefly for the work that SRF is doing?
President White, managers, I don't think so. Once we decide to move ahead with demolition of it, then sections of the bituminous trail might need to be closed, but for SRF's work, it won't be needed to be closed as far as my knowledge. I will note that while we're doing these biweekly inspections, if conditions start to change and we see deterioration, obviously ramping up again, we'll certainly be back before the board with that information and potentially a different recommendation at that time. So just want to note that. And one other thing I want to note is City of St. Louis Park staff would like to see the facility reopened. They get a lot of calls when it is closed, asking when it's going to be reopened. So I just want to let the board know that that was also a request of the City of St. Louis Park.
Thank you. Manager Maxwell.
Would larger pieces of plywood work better than the little pieces that are so many little pieces? Take a larger sheet of plywood, 4x8s, and that way if you spray them, they know they're going over one whole step instead of dodging around 10 little different pieces.
Manager Maxwell, managers, it's trying to take all the data consideration. The approach to plywood was done last year, and we didn't have any people calling and complaining or to my knowledge have any safety issues. And also we're trying to really manage adding spending more resources on the facility to only just tear it out. So trying to minimize the maintenance that we can to still ensure public safety.
Yeah.
So
No, I understand that part. I just thought maybe just one bigger pieces cover a larger area instead of the 5 little pieces there, but that's fine.
Thank you, Manager Miller.
The people that use it, there's a great many of them use it every day. So they're really familiar. It's a tremendous number of employees of the hospital walk it every day, and surrounding businesses, because it's not too well known yet from just general public, because you very seldom you see people with little kids or I'm over there. We're the only public place that you can still smoke cigars, so I'm over there quite often, if not every day. And it seemed you guys seem to have done a good job of, given the deterioration of, making sure it's safe. But just I think just a bigger notice would be helpful.
yeah, Manager Miller, well, yeah, I'll certainly look into that. Should the board vote to adopt this revised maintenance protocol.
Thank you. Is there any other question for Ms. Schaufler? Then voting on adopting the resolution, Manager Hitchmati,
Aye.
Manager Loftus,
Aye.
Manager Maxwell,
Aye.
Manager Miller,
Aye.
Manager Olson,
Aye.
Manager Sando,
Aye.
and Manager White votes aye. The resolution is adopted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The final item is the administrator's report. Mr. Whisker.
Yes, thank you, President White. Just one small note this evening. Just wanted to thank all of the board members for taking a few moments out of your day to fill in the survey with regards to your perspectives and comfort level and attitudes with regards to the ongoing dynamics around COVID. I expect Sherry Lewis and I will be unpacking that and reporting back to the board with some aggregated findings ASAP, so that we can figure out if, when, and how we might think about getting back together or changing our remote meeting framework. I would say that on first glance, no huge surprises. Our board, like everybody else, your families, your neighbors fall across a spectrum of comfort level, from folks that seem to be really anxious to get back into the office with no protections, some protections, or folks that are less comfortable. So not a clean, unanimous verdict one way or the other. And so Sherry and I will probably find time to connect next week and then report back to the board and hopefully make a decision here. President White will be making a decision in coordination with the board on what those next steps are. And other than that, got a lot of action on tonight's board meeting. We wrapped the 2021 audit. We kicked off the 2023 budget. We finished accepting the Nokomis white paper after many years of hard work, and springboarded into a forward-facing direction on climate. So I feel like, as usual, the board's tracking all the major happenings, and those are just some. The COVID survey was the one small tidbit that I had to offer tonight, unless there's questions.
Thank you. Manager Hishmati, you have your hand up?
Yes, I don't have any questions, James, about anything you presented, but I want to follow up on the Metro Mod meeting, and there was some of the things that were presented that some of the other managers talked about, like the MPCA, about the water quality of the different water bodies.
The Met Council or the MPCA?
It is Met Council. Met Council. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Met Council. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And how does that affect what we do in terms of our projects, or how we report, or how is our resident data combined with that? Can you give me some ideas on how that meshes with what they do?
Do you mean the priority waters list?
Right. Priority water list. Mm-hmm.
To be perfectly honest, I don't think it's going to have a huge impact on direction or end output of the district's work. It's a useful point of collaboration, and Becky and Kate, as our policy planners, are engaged in the Met Council's next generation water resources planning. And this is part of that process, is gathering data from community or from watersheds and from other water resource professionals around the different priority rankings of water bodies. And they're going to use that to drive some of their programming, whether that's monitoring or to the limited extent they have dollars available for stormwater management or water quality improvement, it might impact that. So unless you've got a specific question, kind of keeping it high level, I don't see their priority waters list process adjusting our direction or having any significant meaningful impact on the way that we're doing the work. But we are directly engaged, and our team is sitting on the advisory panel for that work and weighing in for the water resources planning, and as well as weighing in on the survey for the priority waters list.
Okay, so we're in on it, and it won't affect it. Okay, it doesn't affect it. Okay. The second thing was
in fact, Manager Miller is kind enough to subscribe to Finance and Commerce. So every time he shows up at the board meeting, I get a stack of reading, and we're actually on the front page. Minnehaha Creek is on the front page, right next to the headline for Met Council's list, the waters list. So the Met Council continues, I think, to see the district as a pretty tight, good partner on sensing, on projects, on climate planning. So yeah, we're pretty directly engaged with them.
Engaged.
On the waters list.
Wonderful, as long as we're closely engaged. And the MPCA was talking about water quality. They're doing that is one of the other things that was reported on. They're going across the state and looking at different waters and trying to figure out. And they had like a page full of data that they take, and on different things. Some of it is some of the stuff we get from our ResNet data, and some of it is the other. Does that affect us very much? Do we participate with that? Can you give me an idea, James, how that works?
Yeah. Again, without specifics, I can't give a really specific answer, but generally my understanding and my experience with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and the way that they've leveraged constitutional dollars over time to support monitoring and assessment of the condition of the state's water bodies is they're doing that on macro 10-year cycles. And so they go into basin areas and they collect all the data and they assess, are water bodies meeting state standards for shallow deep lake water quality standards? Are stream reaches impacted for fecal coliform or dissolved oxygen or biotic impairments? Really what they're doing is they're surveying and inventorying in concentrated focal geographic areas the condition of the state's natural resources, and then they move on to the next one in a cyclical basis. So in terms of how that impacts us, is that foundation of data determines what water bodies go on the state's 3L3D impaired waters list, which falls under the EPA. Impaired waters then become a priority for watershed planning, for municipal planning. They get a total maximum daily load. And so the assessment process that the PCA does is the start of the cascade down into assigning cities waste load allocations and requiring plans for water quality improvement. And then because they're impaired and because plans are required, then funding becomes available to implement those plans. And so in terms of how that impacts us is we've had a very robust monitoring program for many decades. And so when the Pollution Control Agency shows up in our watershed, which they have done in the past, more often than not, they're doing some light data gap filling, but they're usually relying on our data set to update total maximum daily load studies or impaired waters list. And that's happened a couple times since I've been here. They did the upper watershed TMDL, which is all the water bodies west of Grays Bay Dam, with our data set. And we end up acting as a partner where we're convening our cities and being the broker between the local and the state level. I think in other geographies across the state that don't have watersheds or they don't have the same base data set, the state's playing that role that we would otherwise play of coming in, assessing water bodies, and then they're using that data to drive local planning mandates and opening, and then that opens up funding for implementation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. That's really helpful. Thank you so much.
No, great questions coming back from Maud.
If there's nothing else, then we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Good evening.
Everyone, good night.
Good night, everybody.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.